She stood beside him for 45 years, raised his children, hosted his clients, smiled through every silence, every slight, every sacrifice. Then one night, on their 45th wedding anniversary, he raised a glass and said, "I've bought a beach house. Alone." And just like that, in front of friends and family, he left her. But what he didn't know was that she wasn't the one being abandoned. She was finally being set free. Stay with me. This is not a story about heartbreak. It's about what happens when a woman finally stops pretending to be happy and starts living. Martha Caldwell had lived in the same stucco house on Aspen Street for over 4 decades. The porch paint peeled slightly at the edges, the white fence leaned like a tired shoulder, and the roses bloomed faithfully each spring, tended not by a gardener, but by Martha herself, always before sunrise. At 67, her hair was silver and swept back neatly every morning, not a strand out of place. Her hands bore the maps of time, soft wrinkles, faint sunspots, and the subtle curve of sacrifice that comes from years of stirring casseroles, arranging flowers, clapping politely, and folding linen napkins no one ever thanked her for. She was known, almost theatrically, as Mrs. Richard Caldwell, the wife of Flagstaff's most prominent real estate mogul. The woman behind the man. The hostess, the fundraiser chair, the one who remembered everyone's anniversary. But no one ever asked her what she remembered. Not the small attic where she used to write stories by candlelight before the kids came. Not the scholarship she declined to follow Richard to Arizona. Not the manuscript she burned after he mocked it at a dinner party in '83. She remembered it all. And yet, she smiled. Boys. That morning began like any other. Martha woke at 5:45 a.m., stretched gently, and slipped her feet into the same pink slippers she'd worn since their 40th anniversary. Richard never noticed when they wore out. In the kitchen, she brewed Darjeeling, added a drop of honey, and took a seat by the window. She could see the mountains today, dusky outlines under a lavender sky. They reminded her of stories she used to write. Ones about women who climbed things. Not just hills, but expectations. Obligations. Silences. She sipped. And then the knock came. Richard never knocked. He barged. He declared. He entered with purpose, expecting coffee or attention or both. But this knock was different. Hollow. Timid. She opened the door. There he stood, his hair carefully dyed, his posture a little too proud, holding 2 plane tickets and an envelope. "I've bought a property," he said, eyes gleaming. "In Santa Barbara. By the ocean. Just for me." Martha blinked, then stepped aside silently as he walked in, laid the envelope on the table and continued. "I'm not asking for a fight. I just want to live my life the way I want now. It's not you. It's time." He said it like a real estate deal. Sanitized. Transactional. Martha simply stared. And smiled. She didn't cry that day. Not when he packed. Not when the children called and awkwardly said, "We support Dad's decision, but we hope you're okay." Not even when she found his burner phone with the texts from Lindsay Spiral Shell. What she did instead was walk upstairs to the attic. It was dusty. Quiet. Smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. She found it easily, the old wooden trunk. She hadn't opened it in 30 years. Inside, notebooks with her name scribbled across them. A faded draft of a novel she wrote in her 20s. A rejection letter from a New York publisher. A postcard from her mother that said, "Never settle. Not even for love." She sat on the floor and read every word she ever wrote. The sun sank. The room grew dark. And Martha Caldwell, former Mrs. Everything, felt something shift. Not anger. Not grief. But space. The next morning, she didn't make tea. She made a plan. It started with a folder. Inside, she placed heavy checkmark copies of joint property deeds. Heavy checkmark bank records showing her name, but no access. Heavy checkmark evidence of misused funds and business retreats, with women half her age. Then came the call to an attorney who, until now, she only knew through PDA fundraisers. "Do you know what you're doing, Martha?" he asked, surprised. She smiled, for real this time. "No. But I know what I'm not doing anymore." The divorce papers were filed within a week. The community gossiped within hours. Poor Richard, she's ruining his retirement. She must be bitter. She's too old to start over. Martha didn't respond. She had something better to do. She visited the old Caldwell guest house near Grand Canyon, abandoned for years. She stood in the hallway, sunlight bouncing off the wood floors, and whispered aloud, "Let's start here." Within months, she had transformed it. No longer a guest house, but a retreat. For women like her. She called it Second Sunrise. Each room had a journal on the nightstand. No television. No expectations. Just a space to remember who you were before they asked you to forget. She offered writing classes, silent breakfasts, firelit storytelling circles. The first 3 clients were nervous. Then came 20. Then 100. Women arrived from California, Colorado, Texas, each carrying suitcases full of grief, guilt, and unopened dreams. They left lighter, not healed, but heard. One evening, a young woman in her 40s sat beside Martha by the fireplace. "I read your story online," she whispered. "My husband left last year. I thought I was broken." Martha took her hand gently. "You're not broken," she said. "You're blooming in a season you never planned for." The woman cried quietly. Martha didn't offer a tissue. She offered silence. The sacred kind. Richard called once. Said he was lonely. That Santa Barbara wasn't what he expected. That he missed the way things were. Martha thanked him, hung up, and went back to the garden to water her lilies. 1 year later, Martha Caldwell stood in front of a small audience at the Flagstaff Women's Conference. The microphone trembled slightly in her hand. But her voice did not. "I spent 45 years writing everyone else's story," she said. "But I forgot how to write mine." The pause. "Now, I remember." Applause filled the room. But it wasn't the noise she remembered most. It was the stillness after. The peace that only comes when you finally come home to yourself. Martha Caldwell was no longer Mrs. Caldwell. She was Martha, daughter of the wind, friend of fire, author of her own beginning, and finally, alive. The celebration shimmered under hotel lights as soft music drifted across the lakeside resort. Guests in cocktail attire mingled on the terrace, the distant hills reflected in the glassy water, and lanterns floated like silent stars. Martha Caldwell stood at the center of it all, her hand resting gently on the arm of her husband, Richard. She wore a deep purple silk gown that fell to the floor in waves, emerald earrings that caught the spotlight, and a practiced smile that had seen her through 45 years as the wife of Flagstaff's most respected real estate tycoon. She had poured her life into this moment, booking the venue, coordinating the caterers, selecting the wine, and overseeing the decor that rang with nostalgic warmth. Every detail was perfect, every moment polished. She paused to pour champagne into glasses, each flute catching the light like a promise. Her fingers shimmered with the diamond ring he'd given her decades ago, one of the few sentimental things she'd never relinquished. Laughter and clinking glasses swelled around her. Old friends toasted to the couple's success. Colleagues praised their union. Even her own children offered imagined smiles framed with gratitude. Martha placed the platter of finger foods on a table near the stage, smoothing her glove. She watched Richard step up to the podium, clearing his throat. His presence was commanding, professional, just as she had always known him. He spoke of their journey, their grandchildren, their accomplishments together. There was warmth in his words, a lifetime catalogued in carefully chosen sentences. "And now," he paused, scanning the room, "I want to make an announcement." He paused again. The microphone crackled. Martha's hand gripped the podium's edge. "I have recently purchased," he announced, "a beachfront villa in Santa Barbara." The guests stirred. Martha froze. He continued, "Will be my new sanctuary. I plan to live there, alone, for the foreseeable future." Gasps rippled across the room. Martha caught her breath and looked at Richard's face, spare, distant, as though reading a script off cue cards. Her first instinct was shock. He was serious. This wasn't a joke. Then came disbelief. A chair behind her shifted. Her own heart seemed to lurch. The toast that followed felt like a stunning blow choreographed in slow motion. "Here's to Richard," people cheered. "To new beginnings," cried a friend. "To the man of the hour." Every glass raised in silent agreement. She raised hers to. It felt wrong. Hollow. She offered a gentle, automatic toast. Inwardly, she was shaking. The after-party, held in the grand ballroom, was meant to be a joyous extension of the terrace celebration. Instead, it became a quieter version of collective unease. Guests whispered. The band played on. Richard led the dancing, inviting Martha to join. She smiled to please, stepping close as he guided her under the chandelier. He leaned in to whisper, "I'm doing what's best for me." Martha nodded. She wanted to argue, to shout, to demand clarity. Instead, she smiled and said, "Of course." His words felt like ice sliding across glass. Later, in their suite overlooking the lake, Martha removed her purple gown, button by button. She studied her reflection in the mirror, the woman who had invested her youth and heart into being perfect. No hair out of place. No smile missing its mark. But tonight, standing on the terrace, raising a glass while her husband announced their divorce, had pulled back a veneer she didn't know she'd built. She peeled off the last glove and walked to the balcony. Her bare feet stepped onto cool stone. The night air hugged her. She heard Richard's muted laughter from inside, the sound she'd grown up loving, now echoing with hollow distance. Martha sank into a chair, pulling her shawl close, and pulled out her phone. Slowly, deliberately, she opened the Notes app and typed, "File divorce. Find a lawyer. Protect what's mine." Her thumb hovered. She paused. Tears didn't come. She felt a tightening, a reckoning. Not rage. Not grief. Recognition. At 3 a.m., unable to sleep, she pressed her back against the wall, breathing shallowly, mind racing with countless memories. The morning she stayed home to bake her first wedding cake when he deemed her work not professional enough. The nights she stayed silent while he negotiated million-dollar deals in another room, ignoring her presence. The day her first daughter was born, and he refused to stay past business hours, saying, "We have obligations, Marthy." She blinked. Mornings of loneliness. Evenings of void. Moments she could no longer excuse. She opened the browser and searched, Family Lawyer Flagstaff, How to File Divorce Over 65, Protecting Assets in a Long Marriage. She was methodical. Precise. She didn't waver. And a window popped up, a lawyer's page with reviews mentioning the lawyer's compassion for older spouses. She clicked. Within 48 hours, an appointment was scheduled. She woke at sunrise the next day, still wearing her party hairstyle, wiry from lack of sleep but with eyes that gleamed without apology. She bred a soft pot of chamomile tea, selecting a mug she'd given to him on a wedding anniversary plate less than perfect. She poured and set it gently beside her phone. At 9 a.m., she stepped into the law office. The receptionist greeted her with the same quiet reverence she extended earlier in life, looking at her not as the wife of Mr. Caldwell, but as Martha herself. She sat in a leather chair, steadied by the lawyer's calm presence. "Everyone else talks about your husband," the lawyer said. "But today we talk about you." She nodded. Over the next 2 days, she collected documents. Bank statements with joint account withdrawals she never authorized. Titles to properties she helped purchase but wasn't mentioned on. Emails from women's retreats billed to her Amex. A photograph of Richard and a woman in Santa Barbara in a way that confirmed more than rumor. Martha felt steady. Not desperate. Not ashamed. She was meticulous, purposeful. When she handed over the folder to her lawyer, something inside her clicked with finality. She watched it settle on his desk, the first written defense of her own life since she left that home. As she was leaving, he looked at her and said again, "You're doing the right thing." She left without words. That night, she lit 3 candles. One for her past, one for her present, one for her future. She dressed in slacks for the first time in decades, not pencil skirt, not silk, honest pants. She stepped back out to the balcony overlooking the lake. The moon was full, and her reflection in the water was no longer perfect. But real. She whispered, "I am here." Downstairs, in their old home, a letter awaited Richard among the mail. It said simply, "I am filing for divorce. I am protecting my name, my future, and the pieces of me I've spent 45 years losing." She signed it, Martha Caldwell. The turning point. In that moment, drinking midnight tea, filing for divorce, under moonlight, Martha realized the truth. She had given 45 years to a marriage others envied. But this was for her. She wasn't just walking away. She was, finally, walking toward herself. Martha drove home under a sky quivering with dusk. Wheels hum against asphalt. The stucco facade of the Aspen Street house greeted her like an old friend, but tonight, it felt unfamiliar, shadows deeper, contours sharper. Inside, the chandelier glowed too brightly over the living room, the same space where she had invited friends just the night before. Now, alone. She set down her clutch on the mahogany console, heart racing. She needed silence. To think. To feel. Instead, she walked past by the formal room, romanticized decades ago with antique sofas suffocating under lace, and reached the home office at the end of the hall. She closed the door softly and perched on the edge of the leather swivel chair. The desk lamp cast a private pool of warmth. No one would interrupt here. At her side, the product of 45 years, a small safe tucked inside the desk drawer. Its combination, something she learned early on, though never used. Tonight, it felt like Pandora's box. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the numbers, 180475. The door clicked. She paused, her breath tight. Then she placed all her weight on the top and pulled. Inside lay decades of her life, some sacrificed without acknowledgement. A spiral-bound ledger titled, Joint Expenses, Caldwell 1979 to 2024. Folders labeled, Investments, Martha Caldwell Trust, and contracts signed by M/C. Credit card statements in both their names, withdrawals logged only on one side of the ledger. And, almost hidden, a red folder marked, Personal, Confidential. She opened the ledger first. Her handwriting, neat but increasingly hurried, ran along the first pages. Mortgage payments, grocery bills, vacation funds, all shared. But as she flipped, entries pointed to one direction, funds siphoned to Richard's accounts without her signature or her knowledge. She stared at lines like, Mortgage advance to R. Caldwell, $25,000. Her throat tightened. Next came the investment folder. These were opportunities she'd researched, pitched, and agreed to, but only ever received terse thank you notes from Richard. She had invested thousands of dollars from their joint accounts, pouring her own money into silent schemes. None had paid out to her, none recognized her by name. She imagined conversations never had, doors never opened for her, profit never shared. Finally, she opened the red folder. Inside, taped to the inside flap, a printed series of screenshots. Their time-stamped text messages. Richard flirting with a woman named Lindsay, meeting for dinner in San Diego, promises manicured and intimate. These were not whispers, they were open secrets, but tonight they spoke with lucidity she couldn't ignore. She didn't cry. The tears had dried long ago. Instead, her chest burned with quiet fury. She pulled out a folder labeled Evidence for Counsel and began assembling pages into clear packets, ledgers, statements, messages. Everything meticulously tabulated. She printed copies and sealed them. Fingers steady, she placed them in her briefcase. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she laid documents out on the bed, like a forensic tableau of her erased identity. She remembered holding those pages in the law office earlier, the validation in the lawyer's eyes. That look echoed now. She dressed in the early glow of humidity-blurred dawn. Cotton blouse, navy slacks, and a granite-set expression she wouldn't wear for anyone else. Later, at the courthouse, she walked through the stone pillars like someone entering history. Alone, no escort, no entourage, just momentum. She was greeted by a clerk, handed replacement forms, and escorted to a small, smiling office. Her voice was calm, deliberate. I want to file for divorce, and for equitable distribution. I've brought documentation. They accepted her folder without surprise. They didn't judge or console. They just processed. Outside, the early spring sun glinted off columns. Martha felt the warmth on her face, not comforting but purposeful. The real work began after. She responded to Richard's lawyer's request for financial documentation. She signed forms. She answered questions about investments she never controlled. She came home each evening exhausted, not from sorrow, but from growth. Layers peeled back. Old routines crumbled. One morning, as she sorted bills in the kitchen, her daughter walked in, surprised at the sight of her mother in mid-process. Their meeting was brief. "Martha? Is this real?" "Yes, honey. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it to be whole." Her daughter nodded, held her hand. No declarations, no speeches. Just acceptance. Friends gossiped. Some distanced themselves. "Poor Richard," they'd whisper. Others wondered why she would destroy what seemed perfect. They saw the facade, but she saw the mirror their life reflected back. Her sacrifice. Her silence. She wasn't destroying a marriage. She was ending erasure. Weeks later, she met with Richard's lawyer in a hushed negotiation room. He pushed back, threatening hearings, claiming she waived her rights, calling her demands excessive. But Martha didn't flinch. She slid the documents across the table again. "All of this, my name is here," she said. "My money. My property. These words here, your purchase of a beachfront villa, are in your name." She tapped the folder gently. "You paid for it by diverting our funds. I will have my share." Her voice was pliant but unyielding. He nodded, calculating. Word spread slowly. She received calls, some supportive, others scornful. But late one afternoon, a letter came, not from her lawyer, but from a woman named Clara. A hand-addressed card in blue ink. "Dearest Martha, I was wrong to assume you were content. I imagined perfection. Now I see, you built a perfect life on a false foundation. I'm sorry I didn't see you. I'm proud of you." It moved her. Tears came then, long overdue. By the end of that month, a settlement was near. She would receive half of every joint account, complete transparency on investments, and a formal apology. No, an acknowledgement of her role, her money, her mind. Maybe not emotionally cathartic, but legally definitive. On the day she signed the final papers, spring was in full bloom. Outside the office, a cherry tree burst in petal confetti. She closed her eyes and breathed deep. She felt the sap rise. Life renewed. At home, she framed one statement from the folder on her office shelf. "Martha Caldwell, 50% shareholder." It gleamed under the desk lamp. Not flashy. Just honest. That night, she poured a glass of red wine. No toast. No forced smile. Just a nod to herself, successful and hopeful. In that quiet evening, Martha realized she hadn't just filed a lawsuit. She had reclaimed her life. The front door's echoing slam meant Martha Caldwell's carefully constructed world was spilling into the open. It had been barely 10 days since she'd filed the divorce papers, 10 jagged days where whispers and sideways glances followed her down Aspen Street. This morning, she found 2 envelopes waiting on the doormat. One, official and unremarkable, a notice from Richard's attorney affirming receipt of her filing. The second, a letter with cursive handwriting, addressed to her alone. No return address. She paused a moment before picking it up, her hand steady but her heart uncertain. Inside, on heavy cream paper, a note in blue ink read, "Dear Martha, I saw the article in Flagstaff Daily. I never realized, your life, your choices, there was so much you carried alone. For 45 years, I thought you lived a fairy tale. Now I see, you've been brave. Proud of you, Claire." The name was a Gould but meant the world to Martha. Clara had been her dearest friend in college, someone she had trusted with manuscript drafts and audacious dreams. People drifted apart over decades, and Martha assumed Clara had moved on. The envelope, unsigned and undersea quiet, honored that simple truth: someone saw her. Martha folded the letter and pressed it to her lips. For the first time in days, her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't grief. They were release. She carried the letter with her throughout the day. In the kitchen as she lined up teacups in her quiet home. In her study as she sorted coloring pages meant for grandchildren. Even in the bathroom, staring in the mirror at a face she barely recognized, silver wisps softening around a jaw set with resolve. That resolve turned inward. She considered the gossip floating in town. Why now? At her age. Just retire in peace. Judging eyes telling her, you're wrong for choosing yourself. But the letter reminded her, no. She wasn't wrong. That evening, Martha stepped onto her porch and inhaled the crisp Arizona air. The stars were thin and sharp overhead. There was something about the darkness that allowed light to shine brighter. A car rolled by. Headlights glinted off her cling-wrapped letter. She swallowed a sigh and remembered. 11 years earlier, Martha sat across from Clara in their dorm room lounge. It was summer, windows open, late afternoon light flooding the communal room. Clara ran her fingers along the spine of Martha's unpublished manuscript. It's beautiful, she said. You have something real here. Martha laughed, gently pushing the notebook away. I've been told it's too sad. Realism isn't sad, Clara insisted. It's authentic. They sat quietly, writers sharing the same ache. Real stories matter. But Martha hadn't felt brave enough. Not back then. The waves were smaller. But tonight, the final slip of that letter from Clara's old heart rocked her. Present-day Martha folded the letter, set it on the porch railing, and leaned over to look at it like a fragile truth floating in moonlight. She realized, for decades, she'd allowed others to define her happiness: spouse, society, safety. Each smile she gave had been measured against how well she fit the mold of perfect wife. But perfect wives don't file divorce. Perfect wives don't shine in their own names. The following day, she did something different. She wore her favorite burgundy sweater, not what she thought Richard remembered, but what she loved. A pair of jeans that fit her hips comfortably. And not a single trace of gloss. Just bare lips, honest eyes. In town, she met Clara at the local cafe. No grand reunion. No dramatic fanfare. Clara gasped softly. Martha! Hugged her. Held her arm tight. And they sat together, two old friends, speaking truths that weighed too much for handwritten letters alone. That afternoon, Martha spoke aloud, nervous, vulnerable. For so long, I believed love meant losing myself with grace. But I'm learning, love can mean keeping yourself with dignity. Clara's smile cracked open something in her chest. Somewhere beneath every carefully constructed silence was a name. Martha Caldwell, still powerful, still whole. As word spread of the divorce, dinner invitations stopped arriving. People stopped shaking her hand. At the grocery store, she overheard someone mutter, "She's asking for attention." Yet, with each cold shoulder, Martha's heart grew warmer. She'd carried their assumptions too long. Those walls, once protecting her from divorce, were now protecting her from silence. Later, Martha received more notes. One from a cousin, faint regret in purple ink. I'm sorry I stayed silent for so long. Another from Anna, her children's former babysitter. Your marriage inspired us, but your courage amazes me more. Each note, small as whimpers, sounded like truth. That night, she lit candles in her office, reading each letter by soft lamplight. Hearts scribbled on envelopes. Ink soaked into her skin like water into thirsty earth. She thought of Clara's letter again. You are the bravest. Not the perfect. Not the selfless. The bravest. She turned to her computer and typed, slowly. I don't know where this journey leads, but I intend to travel steady. She paused. Hit publish. A blog post appeared under her name, leaving the story I didn't live. Within hours. Comments came, you speak for me. I didn't know I needed this. Thank you. Martha let the notifications rise and fall, not validating her, but greeting her. Days later, Richard's lawyer finalized a temporary agreement. She could stay in the house alone. Access to shared financial accounts was immediate. He was planning his move. One afternoon, she found a group of neighborhood children playing on the lawn. She called to them, offering iced lemonade she'd mixed. They ran toward her, cheeks pink, and accepted the cups. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell, one called out. She laughed, a real, resonant laugh. Evenings became her own again. She read Clara's letter by her bedside, tracing the words. "You've been brave." Martha touched her chest, above her heart. She'd been brave, and bravery was a new kind of home. Visitors came, her daughter and grandchildren for dinners. Soft conversations, no tension. Martha told them, "I'm building something for myself. Not because I'm angry. Because I know I deserve more." Her daughter nodded. Said, "I see you." And here, for the first time in years, that was enough. One quiet Sunday, just before spring broke into summer, Martha took Clara's handwritten letter and framed it. It hung above her writing desk beneath a small icon that read, "Stories matter. Courage matters. You matter." Each evening's Zen light dropped across it, sending words deep into her growing soul. That's where she found her reflection. Not perfect, not magazine-ready, but upright, stirring, quiet revelation. This chapter wasn't about the divorce papers. It wasn't about the money. It was about the mirror. Martha had spent decades polishing for others, until her reflection was a licensed smile, never her own. Clara's letter, and the collection of whispered truth, reflected the woman inside. On a mild summer morning, Martha walked to the hill behind her home, the hill of aspen, carrying a cloth bag of letters. Under the shade of pine, she knelt and opened the bag, reading each one once more. Then, she stacked the empty envelopes carefully and offered a soft prayer. "Thank you, for seeing me, for reminding me I was not invisible." And she walked back down, each step lighter. That afternoon, she started writing again. Not abandoned novels, but essays, reflections, words she thought had been lost. She didn't expect answers. She expected presence. And presence came. The courtroom was cold that morning, not in temperature, but in presence. The kind of chill that comes from too many suits, too many arguments, too many years of swallowed silence trying to find its voice. When the judge declared her full and legal control over the chain of lodges once managed by both her and Richard, Martha didn't flinch. She simply nodded, fingers folded tightly on her lap. She didn't cry, didn't celebrate. Not yet. She walked out of the courtroom alone, clutching the folder of legal documents to her chest like a newborn made of paper and decisions. The Arizona sun hit her square in the face as she stepped outside. It was warm, so it didn't ask her to smile. That night, Martha stood in front of one of the lodges, Canyon Reston, just 2 miles outside Grand Canyon National Park. The signage was outdated, the parking lot empty, and the potted plants near the door were long dead. She smiled. For the first time in months, she felt like she was looking at a blank page. 2 weeks later, construction crews arrived. Not fancy, not expensive, just local hands with worn jeans and better hearts. Martha worked with them, sleeves rolled up, sketching new layouts on a clipboard once used to plan her husband's events. Now it was hers. Gone were the generic motel-style layouts. She tore down the vending machine wall and turned it into a writing nook. Every room would have a writing desk, a quiet garden just outside, and, this was crucial, no televisions. No noise from the outside world. Just enough silence for a woman to hear herself again. Martha called the place Second Sunrise. Because it was. For her. And she hoped for others too. Opening weekend. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony. No social media countdown. Martha placed a small chalkboard out front that read, "Welcome to Second Sunrise. This is not a vacation. This is a return." 3 women arrived. All older. All carrying bags too heavy for the short weekend they booked. One of them, Lillian, was in her late 60s. Her husband had left her for a woman half her age and given her 2 days to pack. Another, Maya, was a former nurse who had taken care of everyone but herself until her body collapsed from burnout. The third, Caroline, didn't say much. She just kept her wedding ring in a velvet box and clutched it at night. Martha greeted them like old friends, offered chamomile tea and a notebook with their names engraved on the cover. "This isn't therapy," she told them. "This is space. The healing begins." Each morning at Second Sunrise began the same way, barefoot on the grass. The women were invited to take 5 slow breaths before journaling in the garden. Then, they gathered in the sunroom for Martha's workshop. Writing to heal. Martha stood in front of them, notebook in hand. You don't need to be a writer to have a story. You just need to stop letting someone else narrate it. The first session was quiet, tentative. Lillian wrote 3 lines and cried. Maya doodled circles in the margins. Caroline didn't open her notebook at all. But the second day, something shifted. Lillian wrote a full page. Maya wrote a poem. Caroline finally picked up her pen and wrote. My silence didn't keep the peace. It only buried me alive. Martha read it and looked at Caroline across the room. For a moment, they were simply 2 women with names, no longer just wives, caregivers, or shadows. They were becoming visible again. One night by the fire pit. On the final night of the retreat, the women gathered around the fire pit behind the main lodge. The stars hung low in the Arizona sky, watching them without judgment. Each woman read a piece of what they had written that week. Lillian wrote about the first time her husband ignored her tears. Maya wrote about how her dreams had dried up like the flowers in her old garden. Caroline read her piece last. I was married for 39 years. I celebrated 39 anniversaries. I held the family through deaths, births, storms. And not once did someone ask how I was. Not even me. The fire cracked loudly as she finished. No one clapped. They didn't need to. Instead, Martha leaned forward and simply said, You don't owe anyone your silence anymore. Caroline wept, not because she was broken, but because something inside her had finally been seen. Word spreads. After that first weekend, Martha thought maybe she'd get a few more bookings. Instead, Second Sunrise had a wait list by month 3. Women flew in from out of state. Some came with nothing but a handbag. Others brought decades of journals, old court documents, even wedding dresses they no longer knew what to do with. Each of them was met with the same tea, the same notebook, the same sentence from Martha. Tell the truth. Not the version you practiced. The real one. The one you never said out loud. Letters to Martha. One evening, Martha sat at her desk reading a letter from a former guest named Teresa. I came to Second Sunrise to forget him. But instead, I remembered myself. Thank you for giving us back our names. Martha framed it. She started collecting these letters and tacking them up in what she now called the story room. It used to be the old guest laundry room. Now, its walls were covered in women's voices. Some were funny. Some were angry. Some were unfinished. All of them were real. Martha's own writing. At night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Martha returned to her own words. She started writing a book, not about Richard, not about the divorce, but about women like her. Women who wore pearls and pain in equal measure, who had smiled through dinners, clapped through disappointments, loved men who barely saw them. Her working title was The Woman in the Back Row, Learning to Stand at the Mic. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and she had never written anything more true. A visit. One Saturday morning, the bell above the front door rang. It was Clara. They hugged for a long time. Clara whispered, You really did it. Martha smiled. I stopped waiting for permission. Looking ahead, Martha knew Second Sunrise wouldn't fix the past. That wasn't the point. The point was space. Stillness. A place to gather what had been lost along the way. She sat under the shade of the patio, watching 3 new women arrive. Each different. Each carrying invisible weight. Martha stood, tea in hand, notebook ready. The sun was rising again, and so were they. At first, the registrations came in as trickles. A woman from Mesa. A quiet divorcee from Albuquerque. One curious visitor from Las Cruces who just needed to sit somewhere that didn't remind her of him. They came quietly, often emailing with hesitance. I'm not sure if I belong. I don't know if I'm broken enough to qualify. I'm not a writer. Is that okay? Martha replied to each one herself. You don't have to be broken to come. You just have to be tired of pretending you're not. She signed every note. Warmly, Martha, just Martha. Then, something changed. A local journalist named Eve attended a weekend retreat as part of a lifestyle story. She expected to observe, take notes, Maybe write a piece about gray divorce and healing with lavender tea. Instead, Eve wrote with fire. Her article, titled The Second Sunrise, a place where women reclaim their names, hit the front page of the Arizona Voice. It went viral. Not flashy viral. Not meme viral. Quiet viral. Shared in group chats titled Old Friends, posted in Facebook communities like Women Over 60 Who Refuse to Shrink. Read aloud in book clubs. Forwarded in late-night emails with subject lines like, "This reminded me of you." By week's end, Martha's inbox was flooded. Women from Dallas. From Santa Fe. From as far as New York. Some asked about flights. Some just asked if they could write from afar and be part of something real. It was never about the lodges. The retreat had grown. They now had 5 fully restored cabins, each named after a flower known for resilience: iris, magnolia, sunflower, lotus, camellia. Each one had a hand-painted plaque outside, bearing a quote chosen by Martha. Outside iris it read, "What the caterpillar calls the end, the rest of us call a beginning." Martha didn't advertise the place. She didn't run ads. No marketing manager. No Instagram filters. The women came because someone they trusted whispered, "She'll understand." And Martha always did. A different kind of fame. Her story appeared in the New Yorker under the title, "The Woman Who Said No More at 67." A podcast wanted to feature her. A television talk show offered to fly her to LA. She declined most of it. "I didn't open Second Sunrise to be seen," she told her assistant, a 35-year-old single mom named Leah who used to be a guest. "I opened it so women could finally see themselves." Still, when the article was printed, she mailed it to her sister in Boston, who had once told her, "You have everything. Why would you ever leave him?" The moment everything sank in. It was a late autumn evening. The kind where the air smelled of smoke and pine needles, and sweaters felt like armor. The women gathered around the fire pit behind the camellia cabin. Martha stood back at first, arms crossed gently, just watching. Caroline was laughing, really laughing, for the first time in weeks. Priya, who hadn't spoken to her children in years, was roasting marshmallows with 2 other guests and humming an old lullaby in Hindi. Anne, the same and who once refused to take off her wedding ring, was telling a story about how she danced barefoot in the rain that morning. There was no pain in her voice. Only joy. Martha slowly lowered herself onto the stone bench near the edge of the circle. The flames flickered, reflecting in the eyes of the women like stars being born. No one called her Mrs. Caldwell. No one saw her as an extension of a man. They saw her. They asked her about her writing. They brought her tea. They sat beside her not because they needed anything, but because they wanted her near. And that, Martha realized, was love. Not the kind she had begged for with perfect dinners and polite smiles for 45 years, but the kind that existed without conditions, without applause, just presence. The sound of real laughter. One guest joked, "Martha, you've accidentally started a revolution." The circle burst into laughter, wine spilling slightly over the edge of paper cups. Martha looked around and smiled, eyes crinkling. "I didn't start a revolution," she said, holding her tea gently. "I just stopped lying to myself. The rest happened on its own." That night, she couldn't sleep. Not from worry but from peace. She walked the grounds barefoot under the moonlight, wrapped in her mother's old cardigan. The cabins glowed faintly in the dark. Lanterns swayed in the breeze like gentle witnesses. Martha walked past each one, fingers brushing the porch rails as if saying goodnight to old friends. She paused at Magnolia, her favorite, where the first guest, Nora, had stayed. Nora had been shaking when she arrived. Shaking from fear, from exhaustion, from 30 years of keeping secrets that nearly broke her. Nora had mailed Martha a handwritten letter 2 months ago. "You gave me a place to begin again. You didn't rescue me. You reminded me I could rescue myself." Martha kept that letter on her nightstand. She had become the woman she needed at 30. That was what made it matter. She was no longer waiting for applause in someone else's spotlight. She had built her own stage, handed out microphones, and taught women how to sing. Softly. Then stronger. Then full-voiced. She looked up at the sky, vast, wild, unedited. Then she whispered to herself, just loud enough for the wind to hear. This is the life I was meant to live. Not the one they dressed me for. The one I wrote for myself. The day Richard Caldwell returned was gray and trembling with wind. It had rained that morning, an early spring storm that left the courtyard of Second Sunrise slick with scent, lavender, wet stone, and pine sap. The sky was the color of an old bruise, but the garden lights were still warm, glowing like hope pressed into glass. Martha was in the kitchen of the main lodge, her hands deep in flour. She was teaching 2 new guests how to fold dough for cardamom bread. Her sleeves were rolled, hair pinned, apron dusted with white. There was music, soft Ella Fitzgerald, and laughter. Real, round laughter that echoed through the room like wind chimes in sunlight. Then a knock. Not the usual gentle tap of a guest who forgot their key. This knock was firmer. Hesitant. Heavier. Martha wiped her hands on the apron and walked to the door. When she opened it, she felt nothing. No tremor in her fingers. No catch in her throat. Just peace. He looked smaller now. Richard Caldwell stood there, rain-damp and older than she remembered. The man who once dominated every room now clutched his coat like a child lost in a museum. His once pristine blazer was wrinkled. His shoes muddied. The leather briefcase he'd always flaunted, gone. In its place, a brown paper folder bulging with folded documents, a water bottle, and what looked like a crumpled tie. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Martha, may I come in?" She didn't move aside. She didn't need to. He read the silence and lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "For everything. I was wrong. I was stupid. And I'm alone now. Without you, I'm nothing." Martha tilted her head slightly, studying the man who once needed everything to be about him. "I begged you to see me," she said gently. "For 45 years, I stood behind you. I laughed when I wanted to cry. I clapped when you won, even when I lost myself." Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came. She stepped just slightly closer, not out of sympathy, but because it was her space and she chose to claim it. "Richard, I died in that marriage. Quietly. Bit by bit. Every time I swallowed a truth. Every time I said, 'It's okay,' when it wasn't. But now, I live." She cried. For the first time in decades, Richard Caldwell cried. Not because he was embarrassed. Not even because he was heartbroken. But because he had come looking for the version of Martha he thought would still be waiting. And she was gone. In her place stood a woman warm with self-possession, clear in gaze, calm in breath. A woman who didn't hate him, but didn't need him. And that, perhaps, was more terrifying than rage. She didn't close the door on him. But she didn't open it either. "You can sit in the garden if you like. It's peaceful," she said. He nodded. Said nothing. Martha turned, walked back through the corridor scented with cinnamon and rosemary, and rejoined the kitchen. The table of women. She took her place at the head of the table. The dough was rising. The women were chatting about books and children and dreams. Someone asked what time they should begin preparing for the afternoon tea event. Martha checked the clock and smiled. "We have time," she said. "Let's make lemon scones. Clara likes those." The room returned to motion, the rhythm of comfort and purpose. But something shimmered under the air, something the women sensed. One of them, Lydia, asked softly, "Was that him?" Martha looked out the window. Richard sat on a bench beneath the wisteria. Still, alone. She nodded. Yes, that was the past. Visiting. No bitterness, no apology. That night, as dusk settled and fairy lights blinked on above the fire pit, Martha took out her notebook. The one she always kept. The one that had, years ago, only been filled with shopping lists and party menus. Now it held real things. Words that bled. Stories that roared. She turned to a fresh page and wrote. "He came back. And I didn't shatter. I didn't rage. I didn't kneel. I just stood so. And maybe that's the loudest I've ever spoken." She tore the page, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the letters to self jar they kept in the reading room, a practice they'd started months ago. Each woman who stayed at Second Sunrise left a letter for her future self, sealed in a time capsule of becoming. Martha's legacy was not her pain. It was her rising. And the way she taught others to rise too. The way she'd made room not only for herself, but for dozens, now hundreds, of women to rediscover their names, their joy, their fire. The past walked away. The next morning, Richard was gone. He had left a small note at the front desk. I understand now. I truly do. Thank you for the garden. I won't come back. Richard. Martha read it, then gently placed it in the paper shredder. Not in anger, but because not all things need to be saved. Some lessons are meant to be learned and released. Afternoon tea went on as planned. The tables were dressed in wildflowers. The tea was fragrant. The pastries flaked just right. A group of new guests arrived. Among them was a widow from Montana, a cancer survivor from Chicago, and a newly divorced mother of 2 from Sacramento. They smiled nervously. Martha walked up, took their hands and said, "Welcome home. You made it." Martha Caldwell stood by the tall windows of the writing room at second sunrise, watching a trail of golden leaves fall like confetti across the morning sky. The first cool breeze of October pressed gently against the glass, and for the first time in nearly 5 decades, she didn't feel like she had to brace herself against it. She was 68 now, and she was finally free. She used to think that freedom would look like a beach house, or a long vacation, or a check with too many zeros. But it didn't. It looked like knowing who she was when no one was watching. And more than that, it looked like knowing she could say no and still be whole. A letter to herself. That morning, Martha taught the last session of her signature course, Writing to Heal. 12 women from 8 different states had spent a week at the retreat, and today was their final circle. Each woman had written a letter to her past self. As they took turns reading aloud, there were tears, nods, held hands, and the kind of silence that only happens when someone says something so raw and true, words can't follow. When it was Martha's turn, she took a long breath and unfolded her letter. Her hands were steady. Dear Martha, you thought staying silent made you strong. You thought forgiving without change made you noble. You thought loving meant disappearing. But hear me now. Love is not the same thing as surrender. Peace is not the same thing as silence. You do not owe your life to someone just because they shared it. You are not selfish for wanting space or truth or joy. You were never weak. You were never too much. You were just waiting for the day you could walk into your own life and call it home. That day is today. She folded the paper, tears in her eyes, but not from sadness. From release. The myth of the good wife. All her life, Martha had worn the title of the good wife, like a badge sewn too tight on a suffocating uniform. She cooked every meal, smiled at every party, swallowed every slight. When Richard spoke over her, she told herself it was respect. When he cheated, she told herself he was just lost. When he drained their accounts and signed deals in her name, she told herself love required sacrifice. But that wasn't love. That was control dressed up in charm. She remembered one Thanksgiving years ago, when she burned the turkey because Richard had thrown her schedule into chaos, inviting 15 unexpected guests the night before. She had cried in the pantry for 20 minutes, then come out smiling, telling jokes, serving store-bought pies as if it were all part of the plan. That night, he called her his rock. But what kind of rock crumbles in private? That moment came back to her now, not as pain, but as clarity. Redefining strength. Strength wasn't standing there with a composed face and a bleeding soul. Strength was walking away without needing to scream. It was reading legal contracts and asking questions without apology. It was building something with her own hands. It was being okay when people said she was crazy. It was smiling not because someone told her to, but because she felt it. And most of all, it was unlearning the idea that she only mattered when she was useful to someone else. Speaking her truth out loud. After the writing circle, a local news station came to interview Martha. The reporter, a young woman in her 20s, asked, "What would you say to someone who thinks it's too late to start over?" Martha didn't blink. "I'd say, who told you that? Who told you your story ends because your marriage did, or your kids grew up, or your body changed? I didn't find myself in my youth, I found myself after 45 years of being someone else's shadow. It's not too late. It's never too late. The only real tragedy is never starting. The real turning point. Martha didn't change because she was angry. She changed because she finally saw the truth and chose to stop ignoring it. She realized she was not born to be the wallpaper in someone else's mansion. Not the trophy on a shelf. Not the echo behind someone else's applause. She was born to write, to lead, to be fully known. And she had spent too long being appreciated for what she did, not who she was. That was the real heartbreak. But also the real beginning. Open book, her voice. Later that year, Martha published her first book, Enough, a letter to every woman who forgot herself. It wasn't a bestseller in the commercial sense. But in every bookstore where it was stocked, a copy always found its way into the hands of someone who needed it. A nurse in Vermont. A grandmother in Seattle. A divorce attorney in Phoenix who kept it on her office shelf and handed it out for free. The cover featured a single chair in the middle of a quiet room. The subtitle read, "You don't need a stage. You just need a seat at your own table." Her legacy was not her pain. It wasn't the betrayal, or the silence, or even the years she lost. Her legacy was what she built from the ashes. The healing she offered. The permission she gave, sometimes just by being visible, for other women to rise. Second Sunrise expanded. A second location opened in Utah. Her granddaughter, Lily, helped lead creative retreats for teen girls learning to speak their truth early. And when people asked Martha if she regretted anything, she would say, "I regret waiting so long. But not the waiting itself. Because when I walked away, I knew I would never go back." Final thoughts. Love does not mean losing yourself. Silence is not forgiveness. It's erosion. You are not unkind for protecting your peace. Even from family. Starting over is not failure. It's the bravest sentence you'll ever write. Martha Caldwell did not rise because she was angry. She rose because she was finally ready to stop disappearing. And she taught the rest of us that the most powerful word a woman can say isn't yes. It's enough. Under the soft glow of early morning light, Martha Caldwell sat in her home office, the air scented with chamomile tea and old paper. In front of her lay a stack of folders bound with care, collaboration proposals, legal paperwork, therapy programs, and letters from women requesting help. This was no longer just a story, it was a mission. For months, Martha had quietly incubated an ambition bigger than herself. The creation of Women Write Back, a non-profit organization combining legal support and creative therapy for women who endured emotional or financial abuse in marriage. This was her mosaic of hope built from broken pieces. The dawn of Women Write Back. The idea had sparked during a late-night writing retreat. In the communal room, women wrote letters to themselves, some so raw they made the walls breathe. One woman, a former accountant, had penned, "I counted everyone's worth but mine, until I lost it." Martha realized, these women needed more than a weekend escape. They needed practical tools and ongoing community support. They needed voice, validation, and justice. Thus, at 68, Martha became founder, mentor, and advocate. She crafted curricula, partnered with lawyers and therapists, and trained retreat alumni to become peer counselors. She found funding through grants, local donors, and occasional public speaking engagements. Live on national television. A few months later, Martha appeared on a nationally syndicated daytime talk show. Soft lights greeted her as she settled into a deep blue armchair. Across from her, the host leaned in, curious and respectful. "Martha, you taught writing to hundreds of schoolchildren. But today, you're teaching women how to write themselves back into their own lives. What sparked that change?" Martha's hands folded in her lap, steady and sure. "I once taught children to write their names, every time they had to introduce themselves. But I forgot how to write my own name on the story of my life." The audience hushed. Her voice carried the weight of decades that demanded to be heard. "Women tell me they stayed silent to keep peace. They said yes to avoid worse. But love isn't supposed to erase you. So I asked them, What story do you want to write now? The audience broke into applause, not because she was famous, but because she spoke the truth they recognized, felt but never said. Growing branches of hope. As word of the organization spread, Second Sunrise thrived. 4 locations now operated across the Southwest. The original retreat in Arizona remained Martha's heartbeat, but new centers opened. One near Santa Fe, hosted in a repurposed adobe farmhouse. Another in Sedona, rich with red rock sunsets. A third in Taos, run by 2 former participants, women who found their voice and vowed to uplift others. Each center followed Martha's blueprint: writing workshops, legal awareness seminars, creative therapy, and weekly support circles. The retreats, once cozy and intimate, became catalysts for systemic change, one woman at a time. Honored as Arizona's Woman of the Year. In a gala held at the state capitol's Grand Hall, Martha was named Woman of the Year in Arizona. The award citation read, "For founding a movement that teaches hundreds of women and their families to reclaim their names, their rights, and their stories." A photograph captured the moment. Martha in a teal dress, flowers pinned at her shoulder, tears in her eyes, not from pride, but from recognition. When her name was called, she approached the podium slowly, unshakable. "I stand here at 67, not because I'm special, but because it's never too late to stop hiding. I stopped pretending to be a happy wife. And that was the beginning of living as me." A quiet revolution. Eliza, once a quiet retreat attendee, now serves as director of the Sedona retreat. She often told her group, "My story started in silence. Martha taught me, your voice is your power." Another former guest, Jasmine, a tax attorney, now leads the legal workshops that help women understand financial abuse, property rights, and divorce law. Together, they guide women right back from boardrooms and retreat circles, every chapter authored by women who regained their narratives. A letter from her daughter. One afternoon, Martha received a package from her daughter, Karen. Inside was a slim journal drew in pen. "Thank you for teaching me that the loudest legacy isn't in our name, it's in our example. Love, Karen." Martha pressed the note to her heart and whispered to an empty room, "You too carved your story." A vision fulfilled. On a warm spring day, Martha hosted the annual gathering of Rights and Rights, Women Writeback's first national conference. Over 400 women gathered in a restored barn in Prescott. They wore name tags speaking more than names: survivor, advocate, founder, storyteller. Martha addressed them from a long wooden table draped in white, fresh wildflowers at her side. "We once believed our power was measured by what we kept quiet, but our power is in what we speak. In the letters, the workshops, the law changes." She paused. When a woman writes back, she becomes unstoppable. Standing ovation. Not polite. Not ceremonial. Unscripted, heartfelt, united. Breaking new ground. Women Write Back went on to sponsor scholarships for women in financial counseling programs, legal fellowships, and creative therapy qualifications. Martha was consulted by local lawmakers on elder financial abuse. She advocated for policies protecting spouses from hidden assets and predatory transfers. Her voice, once quiet in living rooms, now echoed in legislative halls. She had become the voice she had given others, the quiet mother, the teacher, the survivor, spoken for. And finally speaking, a graduation that changed lives. One evening at Second Sunrise, they held a graduates' evening. Each participant pinned a flower to a board, symbolizing growth. A woman named Estelle, who'd stayed silent for decades, spoke. "At 72, I planted a seed here, and I left with an orchard, courage, community, and control of my own life." Martha held the board, a tapestry of blooms, each name fragile yet unbowed. Close of a movement, continuation of a life. That evening, over tea and laughter under copper lanterns, Martha whispered to Clara, who had once given her that heartfelt letter years ago. "It began with words, and now it's become lives." Clara squeezed her hand and smiled, tears bright. They both knew this wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a continuing breath of liberation. Final scene. The next morning, Martha walked to the porch of Cabin Iris. A cool breeze lifted her skirt. She closed her eyes. She remembered nights of curated dinners. Nights when she dimmed her voice and hid her thoughts to make room for someone else. She opened her eyes. Now, she breathed in her own story. The last lesson. Love does not require erasure. Silence is not peace, it's absence. Protecting your rights is not selfish. It's essential. You may write chapters at any age. As the sun rose over second sunrise, it glowed not just on cabins, but on the promise of living fully, finally, and freely. Martha Caldwell stood tall, not as a wife who'd played her part, but as a woman who'd authored her own life. And she was just getting started. Hey there, if this story touched your heart even a little, please consider hitting that subscribe button and leaving us a comment below. It's completely free, but it means the world to us. Your support is the reason we can keep telling these powerful stories. Speech Balloon, thank you for being here. Your voice, your time, and your encouragement truly keep us going. Folded hands. We read every comment, and every single one gives us the strength to keep creating. Right arrow subscribe. Come, be part of this journey.